Welcome to the Gentleman's Guide to Gaming. Edition Wars! That's right, we are not content to leave the mantle of controversy at the feet of Elon Musk resurrecting Gary Gygax with necromancy. No, we are carrying that mantle into the new year with another controversial video designed to stir up the comment section. Edition Wars, specifically D&D Edition Wars, the game everyone cares about and the editions everyone has got an opinion on. Why am I making this video? Is it simply to stir up drama and generate new subscriptions for my channel? Maybe. But no, there's another reason. One is I genuinely love D&D. I don't run it or play it as much as I used to, but it was definitely the formative game for me. It was the game I intended to play first. I turned up to my gaming club on the wrong weekend. My first game was Hercules and Xena: The Legendary Journeys, but then I played Dungeons & Dragons the weekend after that, and it was a memorable experience. A love affair began and never ended. But that's one aspect. Two is I realised from the comment section on that Elon Musk Gary Gygax video how many of you are Dungeons & Dragons fans. You see, for a long time this channel has catered almost predominantly to World of Darkness fans, Curseborn fans, World Below fans, and so forth. I very rarely talk about D&D, but it transpires that a lot of you have opinions on D&D. And this is where we get into point 3. I enjoy a dialogue. I know this is just me talking to a camera, but I enjoy speaking to you in the comments section. And what the comments on that video show me is there was a lot of you who wanted that dialogue. Yes, there were people who commented in that section, say, "You're a communist, how dare you insult Elon Musk? If you insult Elon Musk, you're the Antichrist, you know nothing about business. He saved free speech in America, god damn it," and other insane proclamations. I swear to God, Senator McCarthy, I am not a communist, I'm not a radical leftist, and indeed, criticising Elon Musk or Gary Gygax does not immediately castigate me as the Antichrist, communist or otherwise. I see there are positive traits on all sides of the political spectrum. I do not believe it is a two-party thing, that we have to be tribal. I frankly don't care if you have an D or an R after your name. That's an American thing. But, you know, like all racists say, I know this is touchy ground, isn't it? I have conservative friends. I can't be a communist. They will say words like that. And I will play games with my conservative friends. I'll joke with my conservative friends. I'll go for drinks. I'll chat with them. Hell, we might even chat about politics. And you know what? We can walk away from those conversations without hating each other, without wishing death on each other. And that's because when you're grown up, you can enter into a dialogue with someone and it doesn't immediately have to become tribal. I can call Elon Musk an idiot from my perspective. That doesn't immediately make me a communist. And it entertains me how swiftly people are comparing me to one, or assuming I am one, because I don't agree with their views. But luckily, that's a rather small section of the comments section. I understand there may be a couple of video responses to that video as well. I've not seen them, where similar sentiments are expressed. That because I criticise Elon Musk, I am therefore, I don't know, a heretic. But the fact of the matter is, the vast majority of those comments were open to dialogue. It was people who wanted to express their opinion, and I went in and I replied, and they replied as well, and we were able to chat about our opposing views on Elon Musk, on Gary Gygax, on D&D, on all kinds of things, and we could part ways in a civil fashion. Just as I spoke about in that last video, I could have a chat with Gary Gygax, a drink with him, we could talk about all kinds of things, and I imagine we wouldn't be killing each other after. Neither of us would be wishing each other dead. And honestly, if that was the case, I think I've already won. So, we're talking here about Dungeons & Dragons editions. And the reason is because I love having this dialogue with you. Yes, I know it is just me talking to a camera, but that comment section where you express your opinion and I get to reply to it is really valuable to me, and it tells me something. It tells me that there is some hope in this world, Mr. Frodo, because there are people who will express a contrary opinion and I will be able to engage them. So don't be afraid of saying something that I may not agree with. And if it is absolutely incendiary and you're wishing death on me and my family and my loved ones and so on, I'll just delete the comment and I won't respond to it, and I might block you from the channel if I'm feeling like you need it. But for the most part, I'll reply. So here's my first question to you, before we even get into the topic proper. What is your favourite edition of Dungeons & Dragons? Why is it your favourite edition of Dungeons & Dragons? And, here's point 3, which edition of Dungeons & Dragons have you zero interest in playing or running? Now, I know the vast majority of role players will play or run anything if it's a decent group. A lot of the time it comes down to that. It's who you're playing with rather than the game you're playing. It could be the story, it could be the character, but it's often a social event. For me, a lot of it comes down to immersion. If I'm playing a game, and I more run games than play them, I want to play a game that I can feel I have, I guess, sank into, immersed, found myself a part of that world. And so when I look at D&D, I have certain opinions, because some versions of D&D, some editions, immerse me more than others. And I'll give you my reasons. You know, on talking about edition wars, I think it is perfectly normal for people to develop preferences for things. What is abnormal and is reflective of this political discourse, and the reason I'm not on places like Twitter and I very, very rarely post on Facebook, is because everyone's opinions are so siloed. And so you end up in your echo chambers, you end up speaking to people who you choose to be friends with or who gravitate towards you because of an algorithm. And I know that's happening here on YouTube as well. But when we look at editions of D&D, some of those most hardcore advocates for one edition or another bewilder me, honestly. I understand fandom, I don't understand fanaticism. And I'm glad I can't relate to it. But it's something I want to break down. And that's kind of the point of this video, is to look at the editions of D&D and tell you what I like about each of them and what I dislike about each of them. And maybe find, through that, a common thread. Something that binds all of these editions of D&D and makes them all make some sense. Let's see. Let's go on the journey and see what happens. This is all unplanned, unscripted. It's a ramble, as all of these videos are. And none of them have edits. So we'll start with AD&D, because we're not covering an edition that only has 3 classes. Fighting Man, Magic User, and Cleric indeed. AD&D is the first major edition of Dungeons & Dragons. I know that will immediately put some noses out of joint that I say that. That ran from the 70s through to the 80s. Long tail on AD&D. Lots of follow-up books that I would argue make redundant a lot of the original books. In other words, advanced options that ultimately become AD&D. It is a system, uses a system that is by no means organic, by no means elegant. It is a, I'll be harsh, clunky system that shows its age, is functional, if not flexible, and you will find this with AD&D's second edition as well to a degree, but AD&D's biggest drawback to me, and the reason I've very little interest in playing it, is almost like every character is a sailor at their own station in the submarine. What do I mean by that? Well, it's like the thief has this system to worry about. The mage has this, or magic user has this system to worry about. The fighter is over here. Your cleric is down here. We have a central system, this is the console, but everyone has their own subsystem, which doesn't really interact with the rest. AD&D has that in rather copious amounts, especially as that initial edition of AD&D goes on and on and on. You get more and more of these subsystems that make each class feel distinct. I would actually argue AD&D's strongest trait for me is how each class feels flavorful, distinct, and may even be a reason for why some of these classes have existed in one form or other all the way through to the present era. Because every single one of them has their own thing to do. It speaks to the miniatures game, battle game origins of Dungeons and Dragons that AD&D is set up like this. But there's no real aim for parity. There's no real aim for balance. And I don't necessarily think there has to be. When I speak of immersion and my desiring a game that gives me immersion, I want a system that intersects with setting. So if my system is here, and the setting is for some reason rotating like this in this diagram, I need it to occasionally intersect with my system. I don't know what's going on in front of me, but sometimes this system, as you can see, is flexing and it is nowhere near the setting. And sometimes, there's a magical moment where the two combine. AD&D has that occasionally, but for the most part it feels very much like the system is divorced from the setting, and so it basically cuts into my immersion. I like a game where the system channels the setting. So, tangent from AD&D, I would look at a game like Call of Cthulhu, for example, and say Sanity is an immersive system. It's a very simple immersive system, but it tells you something that is happening to your character that is reflected in the mechanics. Humanity in Vampire the Masquerade is a simple thing. Just a simple meter that you occasionally have to roll dice for. It might go down, it might go up, unlikely. And it invokes something about the world you're playing in. That is immersion for me. That's what I like systems to invoke, or evoke. I always get mixed up between invokers and evokers, even though I know they're the same specialist mage class, but we'll carry on. AD&D doesn't really have that. In fact, to go on the Call of Cthulhu train for a bit longer, I think luck is the most evocative part of Call of Cthulhu, for me. So luck works very similarly to sanity in the sense that it is a finite number. It will steadily reduce as your game goes on, as you spend luck points, whether you're spending them in bulk to buy a success or spending one at a time to re-roll and risk a critical failure. But as it goes down, you get to the point where you have 0 luck left, at which point the keeper, the person running the game, can say to you, I'm afraid your character has run out of luck. There's something incredibly tangible to that for me. More so than sanity, more so than humanity, more so than blood pool or hunger or something like that. Saying you've run out of luck is basically saying to the player, and through them, their character, the only thing now between you and death, most likely, is a roll of a die. There is nothing you can do now to tip the scales. It's just purely down to ability and, well, chance. And I really enjoy that. I don't find D&D, AD&D has that. And I don't hold it against AD&D. It is the first major role-playing game. I mean, I know people commented in the previous video about things like Tunnels and Trolls. Of course, Call of Cthulhu and Traveller were very early as well. AD&D was the big, boom, RPG. And it introduced settings, Spelljammer, Forgotten Realms, but of course, you have Greyhawk 2. But 2nd edition D&D, let's talk about that. Because when we're talking about looking for immersion, we're talking about looking for system that evokes setting, that makes the players feel at ease, like their characters are in the world, like they are in the world. 2nd edition is where it really starts to get very, very good for me. And I could use an example like Faiths and Avatars is a fantastic sourcebook for the Forgotten Realms. And I should note, 2nd edition probably provides the greatest wealth of sourcebooks for D&D. And they are deep sourcebooks. This is GURPS level depth. As in, when they were written to provide a hell of a lot of utility. And when I read them, I can pick out ideas as DM and say, I'm going to use that, I'm going to set the game there, I'm going to use this character, this monster. All of this is fantastic. 2nd edition AD&D does it so well. So much depth in such small print as well, which I really appreciate because it's cramming density into these books. But Faiths and Avatars is maybe the peak for me of AD&D 2nd edition. And there's a couple of reasons. One, it profiles all the gods in loving detail for the Forgotten Realms, and the gods are one of the most attractive aspects of the Forgotten Realms to me as a reader, if not a player or a GM. But it's the setting that made me first want to play a cleric. But the main thing is the kits. The specialty priests. The speciality priests, if you prefer. So, character kits existed across a lot of AD&D 2nd edition books to tailor your fighter to be a certain way, your paladin could be a certain way, and interestingly, this kind of thing has really cropped up again in 5th edition. But what Faiths and Avatars does so well is almost every single god, it may even be every single god profiled in Faiths and Avatars, has a speciality priest listed with them. It doesn't just give you some bells and whistles mechanically that make you feel like you are playing a priest of Talos or Soon, or Suni, I should say, or Selûne, or Lothander, or Merkel, or whoever. It also gives you a depth of flavour, a wealth of it. It tells you how this character should look, how they would act, how people interact with them. What do people think of this character? All wrapped up in a neat little package that you use to augment your cleric and turn them into a cleric of Lothander or Helm, or whichever god you happen to go for. All that information in one punchy little block of text did so well to immerse me as a player when I was first getting into D&D, and I'm still impressed with it today. They didn't need a massive book to do this. This was all confined to pretty much one column per priest. And they even had specialty spells, things that were specific for these clerics. I don't know. I really love it. And this is just one example of how AD&D 2nd edition did it so well. Now, AD&D 2nd edition has other great aspects, namely the expansion of the campaign settings. Yes, you already have Forgotten Realms. You've now got Dark Sun. You've now got Planescape. And more besides. Wow. I mean, Planescape is probably still my favourite Dungeons & Dragons campaign setting. I love the scope of it. I love the feel of it. It has more flavour in one paragraph than some campaign settings have in an entire book. And again, it's one of those things where as a GM, I can read it and I can come up with ideas for stories, for campaigns straight away. As a player, I can read it and say, okay, I want my character to be in this faction. I want them to know this character. I want them to come from this place. I want them to kill this monster. I want them to visit this plane. I can come up with ideas and I can immediately put myself in that world, as alien, as weird as it is. 2nd edition products were fantastic for that, in my view. And yes, we were talking about setting intersecting with mechanics. This is where our specialty priest is all of a sudden just, I don't know what the hell this hand is doing, but he is going crazy as the setting intersects with it, and is making this game feel alive. Is the AD&D 2nd edition system flawless? Absolutely not. I mean, it gets rid of all the matrices from AD&D, but it... I don't really mind the whole subtraction to hit Thaco thing. I think that that's overblown. Frankly, I've never really had an issue with subtraction. I find it about as difficult as addition, which is to say, not hugely. I'm no mathematician, but those were the first two things I learned when I learned maths at school. So that doesn't bother me. But AD&D 2nd edition, I think its biggest weaknesses, and I can't think of a huge number that really disappoint me, is more of an industry thing, honestly. They released so much dross that went within, that sort of separated the jewels, that you had to be selective over what you purchased. You shouldn't just buy everything and think you're going to use it all. I don't really see this as a major problem, quite frankly. AD&D 2nd Edition did a lot of work to help unify the Dungeons and Dragons system. It didn't succeed. Maybe that's its greatest flaw. It still has those separate console feels to as AD&D does. It's slightly closer to the middle. Now the workers aren't all facing their own separate directions. They're all sat around the same central console, but they still have they each have their own workstation. Yeah, so when we get into 3rd edition, that things become unified. D20 resolves all things, more or less, other than damage. The reintroduction of certain classes, which, of course, with AD&D 2nd Edition, here's something that I don't know that I actually mind all that much, but some people do. AD&D 2nd Edition got rid of things like the Assassin and the Monk. They renamed devils as Beatazu or Bartazu, and they renamed demons as Tanari. The Nine Hells became Bayator, Bartor. The Abyss, luckily, remained the Abyss. But you had all these renamings of aspects because of pressure from conservative religious groups, whether the religious groups are actually requesting it or whether TSR did it preemptively because they thought, well, we don't want to get in more trouble. We want to cater to these people. We don't just want to offend them. I don't know. But the fact of the matter is, I don't mind. I think the Assassin and the Monk were nice to have around, but I don't mind demons being called Tanari. I think, if anything, it actually gives them more flavour. It implies an alien race nature to them, and by calling them devils and demons, you're almost Christianizing the planes, which I don't think is necessary, really. But then again, angels exist. Although I think they were renamed Zarkons from memory. So you could say AD&D 2nd Edition saw the dumbing down of Dungeons and Dragons. It was trying to cater to a broader audience, and therefore it removed some of its teeth to do so. 3rd edition put those teeth back in. Not everyone's going to agree with that, because while it added some things, it took away others. It took away the nuance, I suppose, of that console way of working. Now everyone is working on the same workbench. You all have the same system to work from, and you're all sharing tools with each other. Actually, you know what? I'm going to hold that back. You all have your own tools, but you're on the same workbench. We will continue with this metaphor because I think I can go somewhere interesting with 4th edition. I don't know what I'm going to say for 5th edition, but I like it. I like what we're going for. We've gone from a submarine to a workbench in a factory. 3rd edition, everyone's on the same workbench, but they have their own tools. They can speak to each other now. They all understand the jobs they're all doing, but they're all specialists. They all have their own little aspect of play they play to. And 3rd edition introduces the greatest array of character options that's ever been introduced in a player's handbook. It introduces a wonderfully deep monster manual. It provides the Forgotten Realms campaign setting pretty early on in what I would argue is its strongest suit. I love the Forgotten Realms campaign setting box sets, but I think the 3rd edition book is just superb, especially the map. Unfortunately, it kills off, for the time being, sends into torpor Dark Sun, and it kills off for some time Planescape. These things pop up in little bits and pieces in some of the books, but they are no longer in the spotlight. But that was, in a way, necessary. TSR weren't making money on these things, so they had to make certain decisions. And Eberron gets introduced as a brand new campaign setting. You have prestige classes now instead of kits. And prestige classes I kind of go back and forth on. Prestige classes are an aspirational class, where your character has to be built to hit a certain criterion in order to qualify to become a prestige class. It's a little like looking at dual classing in 2nd Ed, how if you wanted a dual class to become a cleric, let's say, you needed to have a minimum of, I think, 17 wisdom. I might be wrong. But you basically had to have attribute prerequisites, but they were pretty slim. In 3rd Ed, you need to hit various things. These skills need to be at this value. You need to have this spell, this weapon, worship this god, that kind of thing. I like the aspirational mode of play. I had a lot of fun with it as a player, but I can see the flaws in it now as a game designer. I think that it's kind of... I don't know if it narrows the field of play or if it actually opens up more options. I suppose I can think of some prestige classes that were really flavorful, and when going back to that whole immersion, mechanics versus setting thing and how they blend, some of the prestige classes were really evocative of that, and others just felt utterly just there. The ones in the Dungeon Master's Guide, for example, I think though that was where you had things like your assassin. They just, it didn't really appeal to me in the same way as some of the prestige classes that came later, especially through the Forgotten Realms themed books, because 3rd edition was Greyhawk in all the core manuals, and the Forgotten Realms books had their own, I guess, typeface and borders and so on. But they were crossover compatible in terms of mechanics. That's something that's very much worth noting. 3rd edition wasn't perfect. It had a surfeit of skills. It started getting to basic role-playing levels of skills. This is where you had things like innuendo as a skill and use rope as a skill. And this was on everyone's character sheets. And that meant there was a lot of bean counting. You had to fill in a lot of skills on your sheet that you were never going to use. And this was the operate heavy machinery of Call of Cthulhu, a skill that everyone needs and no one needs and no one uses. But luckily, there was salvation, a refinement, an improvement on 3rd ed, and I do think it was an improvement. I don't think there are many people who would say 3.5 worsened 3rd edition. And it was 3.5. 3.5 was a revision of 3rd edition. It was close enough that it felt like the same game, but it removed a lot of that cruft, the stuff that people weren't using. It balanced out some of the broken aspects. It introduced some new spells. It introduced some new monsters. And generally, I would say the quality of products that came out for 3.5 tended to be better, more interesting, more captivating than 3rd edition, for my tastes. It was also an interesting edition because we haven't spoken about races and how in previous editions of D&D certain races couldn't play certain classes, or certain races peaked out at a certain experience level, or certain classes did. Like, you know, a druid could only hit level 14, a bard could hit level 21, and things like that, because of the scaling of experience in AD&D and AD&D 2nd edition. In 3rd edition, it is all parity. Everyone has the same growth scale, and any race can play any class. Now, they did a really interesting thing that I don't think ever explored again, which is the idea that you can play a more powerful race. You can play a beholder, if you want, or a troll, but they have innate race levels before they can qualify for the class, because they are essentially stronger than your average humanoids. Now, that was an interesting thing, where essentially you could play a level 4 troll, to use an example that may not be mathematically correct, and each level in troll you gained a specific ability, and then come level 5 you could be a level 4 troll, level 1 fighter, for example. It's an interesting mechanic that, as I say, was done away with, I think, after 3.5. I'm not sure how well what I feel about it. I think that it does break immersion for me, to go back to that hot button word, but I appreciate the mechanical direction of it. So 3.5 was well received, but then there was the massive knee-jerk reaction against 4th edition, which wasn't entirely unjustified. 3.5 hadn't been out for long, and then 4th edition suddenly came out. So everyone had bought 3.5, they were happily playing, and boom, 4th ed. And that didn't sit well with people. And we'll get on to what the industry did in response by the end of this video, I'm sure. But 4th ed still sold out its first print run. It still had a second run. But the writing was on the wall. D&D 4th edition wasn't as popular, broadly speaking, as its previous edition. And I think it wasn't just the botched release that they didn't hold it back for a couple of years. I think that there was the aspect as well that workstation I was talking about, where everyone was using their own tools. Well, now they're all sharing. It's... No, you know what? That metaphor is broken down entirely. Let's send that metaphor into the incinerator that exists on our submarine with a workbench on it. Alright, so what do I mean? At this point, every class has its own function, sure, but there is only really one effective way to play it. Each class is min-maxable. I mean, that's always been the case, but it's advertised as min-maximal. In other words, if you want to play a ranger, you'd best play an optimal ranger, because if you're not, you're going to be crap in this game. And there were some classes with more flexibility than others. It maintained the same unified system that 3rd edition had set out, but each class was built to follow a pretty linear track. And it was reflected in the mechanics of the game that went very much more combat simulation heavy. Interestingly, evoking some of the feel of original D&D, but AD&D more. There are some, if you look into them, there are some very interesting AD&D to 4th edition links that I'm not sure many people have really explored to their fullest. But in terms of philosophy, there's always been this idea that Dungeons & Dragons is first and foremost a combat simulator, and I can kind of see that. After all, there is only one social attribute, as I pointed out before, and therefore your characters are largely built for doing harm. You might argue the bard is slightly different, but even their bard song is there for use in combat. It isn't in use for courtly intrigue, let's say. The vast majority of spells are there to either protect you from damage, to influence combatants, or kill people. And that's all fine. If that's what it is, if that's what D&D is, that's fine. 4th edition is the most modern D&D where they really hammer that home. This is a game about combat. This is a game about battle maps or digital battle maps. This is a game where you are trying to calculate your exact distance from the enemy before you utilize this power. You want to be a certain distance away so they can't hit you with theirs. That sort of thing. For me, that utterly skewers emotion. Now my setting, which is losing orbit from whatever it is I'm squeezing over here. Oh, it's disappeared into a black hole. Now I just have a mechanic. There's occasionally flexing, but never intersects with the world. And it's not helped by the fact that the world of the Forgotten Realms in 4th edition, infamously at this point, had suffered the spell plague. I get that they wanted some kind of world-shaking event to transition from 3rd ed to 4th ed, or 3.5 to 4th ed. It wasn't a popular choice, and they changed the Forgotten Realms so significantly that I don't think it's ever really quite recovered in popular consciousness. I mean, I say that, Baldur's Gate 3 has been a massive hit. I would say that's despite the spell plague rather than because of it, or indeed the Second Sundering, which we get onto with 5th edition. But yeah, 4th edition changed the Forgotten Realms to a degree that a lot of people weren't happy. By this point, fiction for D&D had largely tailed off. I know this isn't so much about the edition itself, but that was a practice of Wizards of the Coast at the time. Fiction was just drizzling. 2nd edition was where it was at its height. It continued very strongly into 3rd edition. 4th edition, tailing off, getting rid of the freelance writers, only keeping a few in-house ones. Good ones, but there weren't many novels released to supplement the games people were playing. And I've always felt that fiction for RPGs is a very good way of getting people into the world if they're not already role players. They want to know more about this world, they read about Kalimshan in a novel, and now they want to set a game there, create a character from there. So novels work like that, in my view. Sales figures may disagree, but certainly I felt their loss come 4th edition and later 5th edition. So 4th edition exists, and let's not be a complete dunk on 4th ed, because I think the system itself is strong. I think it does what it is setting out to do very, very well. I just think that it is a significant enough shift from 3.5 that people just did not get on with it. I know I didn't. It didn't match up to my expectations. I think it was commonly said at the time that people were expecting lots of World of Warcraft players to migrate to Dungeons and Dragons via 4th edition. I don't know whether that was ever the intention, but certainly WoW was a big deal at the time, and I can absolutely understand why a company may want to siphon off some of those players. I don't think it worked. I think the reason people like playing World of Warcraft is because they like World of Warcraft, not because they want to sit around a table playing a role-playing game. But I think that may have been the intent. Make a skirmish game, make a battle game out of Dungeons and Dragons more overtly, attract those players. It didn't work. There are some decent books for 4th edition, but this is where you get the real reduction in campaign material. 4th edition is where it suffers the most, I think, because this is where you start seeing the Forgotten Realms, as an example, really siloed to the Sword Coast. Neverwinter is our city of choice, and then we start covering Waterdeep and Baldur's Gate and the Icewind Dale and so on, but it's all on that west coast of Faerun. The rest of the realms become forgotten. Some of it is dealt with in the fiction that exists, where we're talking about Abir and Toril crossing over, but it's not explored to the extent that it had been in previous editions. And again, I get it. I understand the business decision behind it. Those books, campaign setting, especially location-specific in campaign settings, don't sell well at all. You are appealing to a very limited market. The problem is, for me, I tend to be that market, so it just means I don't get to see that material. So we get to 5th edition, which in terms of popularity is Dungeons & Dragons' peak. It has never sold better. It has never been more mainstream. It is all over video games. It's all over TV. There's a movie that did very well. It didn't do staggeringly well, but it's popular. Certainly that's an improvement on the previous D&D movies. And I have mixed feelings on 5th edition, honestly. Because I admire it for its popularity. I appreciate that it did so well. But I kind of feel it has done so well, and this is purely opinion. I feel that it has done as well as it has because of the fans rather than because of the official product. What do I mean by that? Well, when I say fans, I include third-party producers, third-party companies. You see, when 3rd Ed came out and the open gaming license came with it, all kinds of third-party companies started releasing their own D20 supplements for D&D. They couldn't call it D&D, if I remember, but they had to basically use the OGL license and they could release whatever they like for it. And there was a lot of bloat. A lot of bloat. But there was some good stuff out there too. You get to 5th edition, where 4th Ed, it just didn't really rise from the surface, that kind of open gaming aspect. But 5th edition launches the DMs Guild. Now, the DMs Guild is a community content program which is accessible via One Bookshelf or DriveThruRPG, where you can release your own Dungeons & Dragons books, and you can set them in the Forgotten Realms. You can do pretty much whatever you like with them. This could be a book of magical artifacts, a book of enemies, a campaign setting, location, stories, adventures, whatever. And when compared, I mean, it was always going to be a lot more in the DMs Guild than compared to official products. But if I'm looking for depth in the Forgotten Realms or D&D now, whether it's in the campaign setting or whether it's character options, whether it's new magic, whether it's new magical artifacts, I would go to the DMs Guild before I would go to a Wizards of the Coast product. It isn't because I hate the authors at Wizards of the Coast. I'm sure they are absolutely lovely people, very talented. But it's because I know that there's a lot of people pouring a lot of heart and there's a lot of options on there. And what's more, I can see how well they're being reviewed. I can see who is pumping up who. And so I love 5th edition as a fan creation tool. It kind of moves back slightly from 4th edition to 3.5 in the way it uses the D20 system. It does not have the overwhelming surplus of skills, far from it. Skills are almost a thing of the past. It removes certain traits from your character sheet, things like fortitude, reflexes, and will is now all tied to your attribute block. So 5th edition is, in a sense, the most simplified version of Dungeons and Dragons. And in that respect, it is the greatest option for onboarding players. You may disagree. But I do think that if it wasn't for the DM's Guild, which I know is a big if it wasn't for the DM's Guild, 5th edition would not be doing much. Now, I say all this knowing that the average role player knows nothing of the DM's Guild. The average role player picks up their books in a store or on Amazon and that's it. They play with what they've got. It's only the people who are really into the hobby, the people who are in the industry, who are familiar with the DM's Guild. But I'm speaking for myself here, and I can say that when I look at the DM's Guild and lots of the products that are on there, lots of the old school creators who use the DM's Guild to create products for 5th edition, I am impressed. It excites me, it makes me want to play the game. And yet I very rarely do. I very rarely run 5th edition, because 5th edition as a rule set doesn't inspire me. I like the flexibility. I like the immersion. I like the idea of a system that complements the gameplay and that's a system that complements the setting. And so what I end up going back to, finally, when we get through this Edition Wars video, it hasn't been much of a war, has it? Because I tend to be a fairly reasonable person. I haven't said one edition is absolute dog shit, but in this case I don't think any of them are absolute shit. There's going to be people in the comment section now saying I think 4th edition is, and that's a sentiment shared by many. But if I'm to use D&D, I'm going to be looking back at 2nd edition content and 3rd edition or 3.5 edition. But more accurately, what I'm going to be doing is looking at Pathfinder. Because when I choose to run a fantasy game in the D&D mold, I don't run D&D anymore. I run Pathfinder. I run Pathfinder 1st edition because I've not bought 2nd edition. Never had cause to, because I keep finding use from Pathfinder. And what's more, I don't use Galarion, their Paizo's campaign setting. I don't use the Pathfinder sourcebooks. I use their bestiaries because I think their bestiaries are amazing. Such an amazing array of monsters. But I can use Pathfinder, the rules, which is basically a further refinement of 3.5 to the point where I really enjoy it. It has so much utility, but I can use that with the material, the setting material from 3rd edition and 2nd edition, and I, not just as a game designer, but as a DM who's played through these editions, can easily interweave that material with Pathfinder and make it feel immersive. I can make the players actually enjoy the game as if they are playing their best game of D&D, despite the fact it's Pathfinder with D&D aspects. And I think that's the thing in the end. As role players, we are always hybridizing our games. We're always adjusting them, we're always tweaking them, we're always cutting bits out we don't like, and we're always adding bits that we want. And that's part of the fun of the hobby, isn't it? We can change these games to make them into the games we want them to be. And sitting on YouTube and ranting and raving about how this edition killed my childhood or I'm never going to play this game again is so much hyperbole, when you could just play a previous edition, or you could just tweak the edition you dislike, change it to make it a game you do like. Now, I know there are people who, of course, don't have the time for that. They want to buy a game and can play it right out of the box. And that's absolutely fine too. There are lots of games out there on the market. So, Pathfinder is my Dungeons & Dragons edition of choice. I will have to look at 2nd edition sometime. Not really looked into the newest edition of D&D. D&D, what was it called? 1 D&D for a while. Some people are saying it is a new edition. Some people are saying it isn't. But apparently it's got such a wealth of new content that it couldn't exactly be called 5.5. They're probably just going to call it Dungeons and Dragons at this point, because that is the naming convention of the now. It might even say the Dungeons and Dragons. But yeah, when it comes to Edition Wars, I don't really understand the need to get animated about why you hate one edition over the other, or even love one edition over the other. I guess that's more understandable. Creative enthusiasm is great to see. But what I would advocate is, if it isn't a game for you, if you found an edition that isn't to your tastes, either continue playing the old one or try a different game. I think that's sometimes referred to as gatekeeping, but I'm not the person writing this game. I'm not the one saying you can't play it. I'm suggesting that you find a game that better suits your tastes, rather than getting all bent out of shape about an existing or upcoming edition. I think maybe since things like the death of Google Plus, since Facebook groups are now going the way of the dodo, we don't see so much edition warring these days. I'm sure in certain subsections of RPGNet, EN World, and other websites, we will find forums where people are still arguing the toss over what edition is better. And that, I think the point of this video really was to highlight that each edition has a strength, and each edition has its faults. Really, the question is, what are you looking for? If you're looking for the ultimate in utility, the most options possible in a game, go for 3rd edition, or 3.5, or Pathfinder. They're all within that same bracket. If you're looking for the most streamlined combat experience, in fact, that wouldn't be 4th edition. If you were looking for the most streamlined experience, go for 5th edition. If you're looking for the most depth of option, go for 2nd edition. If you're looking for a combat simulator, go for AD&D or 4th edition. If you just want that nostalgia hit, go for AD&D or AD&D 2nd edition. If you want immersion, like I do, go for 2nd ed and hybridize it with 3.5 / Pathfinder. That's what I do, and I find it works very, very well. There's so much I love about Dungeons & Dragons, and I can tell because I have been making this video now for well over 45 minutes, and should probably stop. I refer you back to my question at the very beginning of this video. If you have a favourite edition of D&D, I want you to tell me what it is. And I want you to tell me why. What is it you particularly enjoy? And it could be something as simple as the first one you played. I think that's how a lot of us make our choices. But also tell me the edition you aren't interested in playing. And be honest. I imagine a lot of people here are going to say 4th edition. Some, who are old school players, are going to say 5th. Others, having played AD&D, are going to say, I never want to go back to that. But it will be interesting to see what you think and where you disagree with me. Remember, let's keep it polite. We might be able to have some conversations out of this. And otherwise, I bid you a very Merry Christmas. And I will see you again soon. Thank you very much for watching.